We are live. Well, Robert, thank you for jumping on.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
I've got a list here. We're podcaster, researcher, advisor, CTO, founder,
Oh, sure.
investor. Are you okay
You
to
don't
do
have
a
tap dancing on there? No,
tap?
nothing? Nothing about
Ah,
tap
tap
dancing?
dance. I knew I
Uh,
missed one. Yeah.
uh, yeah, so I've been in computer security for 30 years. Most of that was on the red team and a little bit on the blue team side. So it means, for those who don't know, mostly attack, as opposed to defense. I primarily grew up in the web application and browser security space, and then gradually moved into more of the host security space. A couple of years ago, we sold a company called Bit Discovery to a publicly traded company called Tenable. We started a fund called Grossman Ventures. It's a small fund, early stage seed fund in the computer security space. And I wrote a book called AI's Best Friend, which is about hallucinations and the alignment problem. And then most recently, we started a new code called Root Evidence, also known as Evidence, that is designed to go after the vulnerability market space, really trying to tackle what we believe are the vulnerabilities that matter, as opposed to the 309,000 CVEs out there that do not seem to matter. Out of them, if you believe like VulnCheck, for instance, there's about 4,000 vulns that have ever led to any kind of loss ever. So that's very close to around 1%, like 1 point something percent, 1.1 something percent.
Jesus.
And we think the number might even be smaller than that have ever actually led to a claim, like an insurance claim. So we're starting to build a company in that space. And so I am the CTO of that company, and we just took a $12.5 million round for that company. And yeah, just rocking and rolling, staying
Nice.
busy.
Congrats, man. Sounds like it's off to a hell of a start. And we'll get into to root evidence in a bit. But I guess
Yeah.
just going back, if we dial the clock back, 30 years or so, what got you into this whole world? Was that sort of tinkering? Was that did you fall into it? How did it all come to be?
Yeah, I have always been interested in it since, as far as I can remember. I didn't really kind of get actually into it until really, post or like late high school and then in college. I don't count the clock until I got into college, despite the fact that I did do stuff earlier than that. The reason why is that was the very first time I ever had a Unix account, and so it was the very first time I really felt like I was interacting with the computer at a computer level as opposed to this nice graphical UI on top of it that kind of hides everything from me. But yeah, my friends were not exactly the most, straight and narrow type. And I really liked hanging out with those guys. And so it's not so much that I was doing anything wrong, although I occasionally was. In fact, the very first thing I ever broken into on my own was a bank. But it was surprisingly easy. But really, what ended up happening is I eventually started a nonprofit called Ethical Hackers Against Pedophilia. And when I was doing that, in the daytime, I was doing sort of like not so good things, but at nighttime, I was acting like this kind of pseudo vigilante kind of guy and like saving children. And so it was very hard to reconcile the two in my mind. Like how am I so nice in one context and kind of a piece of shit in the other? And so yeah, I just kind of one day decided I got to reconcile this and stop all the stuff I was doing. So I became a good guy, like kind of overnight. And I really switched like my thinking. I mean, I still have the adversarial thing in me, so I still know how I used to think about things, and I still know how other people like me back when I was at that point in my life think. So it was very useful for when I'm doing red teaming exercises. I know how I would attack a thing because I was the guy attacking the thing. And yeah, I mean, I guess the claim to fame back when I was running my consultancy practice years ago, we never once ever failed to break in to anything we tried. And
Wow.
uh, I and a huge chunk of our clients were actually security companies. They hired us because they knew that by reputation that we were very good. So it wasn't like we were breaking into like some mom and pop like pet store or something. You know what I mean? With absolutely no security. These are like banks and security companies and gigantic software manufacturers, and you've heard of the vast majority of our clients, for sure you have. So yeah, we ran a really tight shop. It was actually very very fun, but the subprime mortgage crisis exploded, and turns out about well over half of our clients were somehow financially related, even if they weren't financials.
Oh, wow.
And so it just turned out we just didn't have enough money in the bank. So I kind of like walked that whole thing back. I actually fired myself. My business partner continued to run the company after I left, but just couldn't afford the overhead or whatever. So,
Mm.
but during that whole process, we had about one third of all of the web-based vulnerabilities, top ranked web vulnerabilities, and back then they were ranked. There was a ranking system, which kind of went away, which is a little bit surprising. But anyway, for a while, we had about a third of all of the top ranked vulnerabilities came from my lab, from me or my business partner, basically. And so we were doing all kinds of really crazy research. And I think we pushed the needle forward like significantly. Web application security really was not a thing when I got started at all. There was like three other people in web application security when I started. Luda Yu,
Wow.
Umbrella.name, Michael Zalewski, and me. The first two guys, we don't know what happened to him. Maybe he went to Chinese military or something. We don't know. Michael Zalewski's retired, so I'm the only person who's been doing it consistently as long as I've been doing it. And now it's like this whole industry, and like now there's tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people working in that industry. So it's certainly changed a lot since I got started.
No, yeah. Even from my short tenure in this space, relatively in the last 10 years or 12 years, from a recruitment standpoint, we see it kind of explode, and it's now more front and center than it certainly was 10, 12 years ago. And I was just going to ask you, in that span there, is there any, and in fact, I should say, for those that don't know, the handle RSnake is you. And
Yeah,
is
yeah.
there any particular, I don't know, bit of research you came out with that you're most proud of, or like, crikey, that was a huge one, that was a real sort of turning point of, whoa, we've got something here.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of stuff I don't talk about publicly that is even more scary than the stuff I do talk about. But I think I was actually on the defensive side is the thing I'm most proud of. It was a mix of two things kind of happened right in short succession. It was when I was at eBay. My boss is kind of a funny guy. He's like, like we want to put anti-phishing technology into the browser. So go call Microsoft. I'm like, call Microsoft? Like, what do you mean call them? Like 1-800 Microsoft and like,
It
hey,
was
I'm
is
Robert.
Bill
So like,
free?
I don't
Yeah.
like what I don't have no idea what you mean by this. And he's like, figure it out. One of those like, just go figure it out. So I did. I called a whole bunch of people and I figured I actually found somebody at Microsoft who was willing to talk to me. And sure enough, they're like thrilled. They're like, yeah, this is awesome. This is really super interesting. And so, meanwhile, I was also talking to the Mozilla team back when there was about 50 people on the entire team, and the whole office smelled like feet. And so I went over there and I'm like, yeah, I want to put anti-phishing technology into the browser. Like, what do you think? And they're like, that's a great idea. You should write a plugin for that. I'm like, no, 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 no. I did not say I want to write a plugin. I said I want it in the browser. And they were like, yeah, we're never going to do that. Meanwhile, the Microsoft guys are like, yeah, not only are we going to do it, we're going to buy a company to do it. So they bought, I think it was Whole Security, maybe. I think it was.
Why were Mozilla
And
so anti putting it in the browser and then Microsoft weren't?
anything that wasn't core to browsing, they felt like should live in plugins
Okay.
or add-ons, extensions. Where Microsoft is like, we want to have market share, we want to win. So they had a very different philosophy. Like, we just want to like win, is what they were thinking. And one of the ways to win is to not make people think Microsoft is broken. And one of the ways to make it appear that Microsoft is not broken is to have eBay work properly. Because people think of when they open their browser, especially back then, the page they're going to is the internet. They're not thinking about it the way you and I might think about it. They're like they pop open their internet because it even says the internet back then.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
yeah,
they
yeah.
click on it and they're like, this is it. And if their homepage was set to eBay at any point, they now believe eBay is the internet. And in fact, I remember I was talking to a buddy of mine, he's a really good security researcher, and he's like, my mom really doesn't understand what I do. She thinks the internet is a physical location somewhere in Northern California. Like it's a place, like it's an
Yeah, yeah.
actual like place you could go visit or something. So like very, very, naive way of thinking about the internet. So if Microsoft's customers are happy because eBay is working properly, then Microsoft doesn't get the downstream, like your product sucks, right? Because people don't understand what's going on there. Anyway, so long story short, they implement it in the browser. Later on, Google realized that they wanted to win. And so they're like, we got to have parity on all the features. So they implemented that feature and then just sort of gave it to Mozilla. And so now Mozilla has it, and Chrome has it, and Internet Explorer has it. Everybody has it
Wow.
because of those conversations. But then I had another conversation with the Netscape team, and they were all very proud because they had created this thing where you could like, you go to a bad website and it'll show you Mozilla in the strictest mode possible. You go to a medium website or unknown or whatever, and it'll give you Mozilla with like no controls. And then you go to a site they trust, and they'll give you Internet Explorer. And I'm like, this is the worst idea I think I've ever heard because what it means is that if I have an exploit for any one of those variants, I'll just send you to a website that you trust or you definitely don't trust or whatever model I want, and then cross-site script you, inject my payload, and poof, and now I've got exploitation in your browser. Like you did it exactly backwards. Like if I'm eBay and you trust me, tell me, let me have some signal, some flag or something to tell you to not trust me. Like let me turn on the maximum security settings as far as you'll let me turn them on. Let me turn them on. And they're like, you could tell I just like destroyed them. Like they were really, really hoping eBay would be all like gung ho on this, and we're like, absolutely not. It was this one meeting. I'm like, you guys are idiots. But the idea of having something in the browser, something the website could inform the browser, hey, there's a lot of untrustworthy content on this page. Please don't trust this page. Like turn a lot of security controls on this page in particular. Like the rest of the site's fine, but this one is injecting something, and I don't trust the content. So please be careful with it. That turns out to be a great idea because now the browsers have sort of abdicated all of the security risk back onto the website owners. Like you go figure it out. Like you know what your website is, you know what should be going on there. And sure enough, it took several years, but Mozilla finally built it into the browser as something called content security policy. So yeah, so genuinely, I've your this code that I was deeply involved with is on every single person's mobile phone, on their desktop, browser, everywhere.
Wow.
And so, some people are billionaires because they have $1 billion, and I'm a billionaire because I've affected 1 billion people positively.
That's
So,
pretty cool.
yeah, I'm really proud of that one. I mean, I've done some crazy research, unbelievably crazy things. I've, taken down leadership websites in Iran because of code I wrote, and other stuff is like finding exploits in the Great Firewall of China, exploits in the Narrow browser and North Korean Red Star operating system, and on, like all this crazy stuff. But like, I'm not nearly as proud as, this little thing that's sort of under the hood that no one even really knows exists unless you're like deep in the weeds web application developer or something.
That's a pretty cool story, I must say, from
Yeah.
where it started, cool Microsoft to where it is now.
Yeah,
And you
exactly.
kind of alluded to it earlier in the conversation there around, yeah, there was initially four of you, and then it's grown into what it is now. And you mentioned around there's not no longer the ranking system online with the
hmm
vulnerabilities and things. It-
hmm
what are the changes you've seen in the last sort of 30 years? What was security research, and where are we at now?
Well, things have changed, in my opinion, significantly for the worst over the last 10 to 15 years. So I think I would describe it as a bell curve. Back in the dark ages when I started, there was no documentation, nobody to talk to. Every bit of research was just hard earned. You had to like dig into the protocol or like read the source code or fuzz things yourself or whatever. It was brutal, like really, really tough. I mean, I built like man-in-the-middle proxies at least 100 times before Burp Suite came out and was a commercial offering or whatever. And I was always arguing like there should be a proxy that you could go in both directions and stop traffic in both directions and change stuff. And everyone's like, you're an idiot. Like, why would you ever want to do that? And now it's like every hacker has this. So it's like I get to be proven right, but like it took a lot of work to get there. Um, but something that happened that I'm not super pleased with, when we started, everybody was like really interested in it. Like we were all like actual like enthusiasts. I'm not saying we're good, but because how could you be? There was nothing too be good with yet. I mean, the internet was so new. There was not much attack surface to even go and find issues in. But also there was nobody, there's no barometer, there's no way to like measure anything, right? It was just, everyone was just doing what they could. So it was the dark ages, but it was fun. Like you were doing it because you enjoyed it, right? You were doing it because you were intellectually curious and it was fascinating to see what you could and couldn't break into and whatever. And then later on, it became a job. Like it was like a thing you could actually make money at, and there was companies starting to be formed. In fact, one of my buddies was the very first company to ever get sold in security. It was Packet Storm Security. Got sold to the military actually. And we're all like, wow, security is actually a thing that gets bought and sold now. And like it was just fascinating that such a thing could be true. Like it was just a very different time anyway. But then something happened, like it became a profession, and then all of a sudden it was like this slow sinking decline of talent. And I think it's a confluence of several things happening at once. And I don't know this for a fact, so please don't yell at me online or whatever. But
Yeah.
when I talk to a lot of different security experts, they all seem to nod their head and seem to agree with this. So I think I'm right. It's an interesting theory anyway. What happened is we all stopped doing security. All the people I know who used to do security don't do security anymore. Like I'm a CEO of a company, or I'm a board member of a company, or I'm a CTO of a company, or I'm running a fund, or I'm semi-retired, or I moved completely out in a totally different industry, like in robotics or something else, sort of semi-tangential, but definitely not in security or whatever, right? I'm the security expert. I'm no longer doing security. I might be working at a security company, but I'm doing it as an administrative role. I'm an executive of some sort. Um, so then there's the next tier down. Like, where did those people come from? The people just beneath those people, came up, 5, 10 years afterwards or something. Well, they came up during the, internet is a job. I can make money in that phase. So they don't necessarily have the exact same passion. There's some passion there, but again, those people are still managers too. They're not also not doing the job. They are CISOs, they are directors of information security, they are, pen test leads or whatever. They're not really doing the hardcore stuff like they used to be doing. So even they aren't doing security. So who is doing security are the next generation. So it's like now we're 2 degrees beyond the abstraction, right? Uh, and they tend to have come from school. They went to a college course in security, or they used to be in IT and they kind of got sucked over into a security role or something where it's like, whatever, I'll do that job. They had no passion for it or very minimal passion for it. They're not questioning why we made decisions. And by the way, we made a lot of bad decisions when we got started. Like in security, we did not get it right on the first try. There's tons of things we definitely got wrong. So if you're learning from documents that have been written like 10, 20 years ago, you're learning things that we know to not be true anymore. And yet the college professors they're not also not security people, so they're not actually doing the research necessary to disvalidate or rethink of these old ways, old paradigms, for lack of a better word, that we came up with, 20 plus years ago, 20, 30 years ago now. And as a result, like I go into these big companies, and not every single person, obviously. I mean, there's certainly some people with insane passion and they're just amazing, and I'm, utmost respect for where they are. But the vast majority of them are absolutely not qualified to be doing even the minimal things that they are doing, which is mostly button mashing. Which is why if I look at, I think McKinsey put out a report, they said they're going to see a 10x increase in MSSPs over the next 10 years in value, the amount of revenue that they're creating. And so, but why? Well, the reason why is because let's say you like were at John Deere or, you know, Campbell Soup or something, or whatever, right? And it's like, are you going to get the best and brightest security guys working for John Deere or like Fannie Mae or something? Like, you might get okay people in there. And, look, it's almost surely the best people in the world work there just because I'm saying this, but you get my drift, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Like all the experts are like, what do you mean? And of course we work for Campbell's too. Uh,
yeah.
you know what I mean? Like it's hard to get the best people to go to a place where you're not doing really cutting edge research, right? They
Yeah.
want to be doing super amazing cutting edge stuff because that's what their passion is, because that's what makes them good is their passion, right? And so I think what's going to happen is we're going to see a greater and greater consolidation of really super awesome technical people in these MSSPs, and they're going to be kind of loaned out to all those big companies. And then you're going to augment with, and I'm wildly overusing this term, but I think you'll know what I mean when I say it, with AI and automation, right? I don't mean AI in the way that most people think of AI. I mean more like routinized procedures following a certain pattern. You know what I mean? Like well regimented. I don't mean just run off the rails like an LLM doing whatever it feels like.
Yeah.
Because the only way you can scale is basically removing the people out. Like just get rid of them. So you have super awesome experts who routinize this thing, come up with all the next gen research, figure out all the cool things to do, turn it into code, and then you lend that code and their expertise out to all of those companies. So I think MSSPs are set to do extremely well as a result of this. And I don't think people really want the overhead of employees anyway. They just don't. I mean, no offense to human beings, but we suck. Like we're like, late and, have kids with drippy noses and, and take vacations and all this other
Yeah.
human stuff that is, turns out adversaries don't give a shit about that. They're going to attack you when they can attack you and they can attack you 24/7. So if you're not sitting there at your console ready to, with your finger over the button to block it, at the exact perfect second and happen to press the button just perfectly, just in time, I mean, that obviously that's not the way this is going to end up playing out. We have to get away from humans in the loop. Really, any place we can. I mean, there's going to be places that are harder than others, but yeah, I think that is where the future is almost entirely automation with a handful of really bright people and a very few, hot spots for security expertise.
Understood. I was going to ask you, partway through that until you mentioned the AI and the automation piece around, it sounds like there's been a bit of a diluting of not only skill set, but also that passion and the reason why we got into it and how do we get that back? But it sounds like the AI automation piece will kind of plug that gap to a point and maybe make this better going forward.
Yeah, I don't think we're getting back. I think the heyday of, you know, absolute chaos online of you being able to break into anything in the Wild West and no one having any idea how anything was documented or whatever is, I wouldn't say over, but man, we have. It's funny because AI kind of feels like that a little bit all over again.
I
It's
was just
like
going to ask you, is that what AI is
it
now? Yeah.
it is, but for people like me, um, the patterns are the same. And so while yes, it is new because the syntax is new, the interface is different, the attack surface is slightly different. It's the same problem. It's you're intermixing code with instruction with your user input with instructions, and you're trying to like pretend like you can do that, and it turns out you just can't because they're not syntactically, protected from one another. We don't have parameterized queries for LLMs where we have it for SQL injection, for instance. So, like, to me, it's very obvious where the problems are going to be because I've been around so long. I know exactly what, I can just draw dotted lines between all the existing exploits and how they might translate into an LLM world. And it turns out they're nearly the same. I mean, they're a little bit different. I mean, the idea of doing prompt injection can actually be quite complicated depending on how you do it, and breaking out of LLMs is a little different, but really it's the same stuff. I mean, it's extremely similar. If you're familiar with old security paradigms, you're gonna be able to map them nicely to LLMs.
I got you. And I guess, keeping it on that AI theme there, you must see this from maybe like an investor or an advisor standpoint. There's a lot of organizations coming out now that are AI security, agentic AI security driven, and very, very broad question to ask. But again, what's your take on this whole movement here of more and more money coming into AI security?
Security or AI, or do you mean because there's different things, right? Do you mean security of LLMs? Do you mean security companies that use LLMs in their products, or do you mean the security of the use of LLMs? Because those are all kind of sort of different things.
Sorry, yeah, I'll clarify. I think in my head, I'm more thinking around technology that secures either LLMs or agentic AI
Mhm.
is the sort of the company set that sort of springs to mind. Won't name names, of course, but that seems to be a real pattern at the moment that we're seeing.
Yeah, I mean, I literally was on a call with somebody like an hour ago who was doing this exact same thing, and I've seen quite a few companies trying to do this at various different levels. Some are trying to do it in detecting like more of like anomaly type detection, like normally that's never called this MCP in this way before. Some are doing it more like, well, the MCP should only be able to do these five things, and if it does anything other than these five things, just drop it, you know? So it depends on like what you're talking about. I honestly, I can think of very few use cases where a publicly facing LLM is a good thing, and almost none of them involve running arbitrary code. It's really super, super, super dangerous, and so I wouldn't recommend it to begin with. Which means, of course, that a lot of people are going to do it anyway. Just because I tell people not to do it doesn't mean they're not going to do it. They're definitely going to do it. So that means there will be a market for people who apply band-aids on top of the very poorly constructed systems. I don't know how big a market that is, uh, and there's a very specific reason why I am not super bullish on it. I'm not saying there isn't some money to be made. I think there is. If you talk to the insurance companies about where you see losses, they do not see losses because of LLMs. They do not see losses because of dynamic web enabled um, forms or processes at all. Like there just aren't losses there, zero. And I think the answer comes down to imagine you're the bad guy for a second and you have the opportunity to do one of two things and only one of two because you have a limited amount of time, right? One is you take an exploit off the internet that you know works well and you put it into a tiny piece of code that just runs it across the entire internet. If it finds anything that's vulnerable, you get a shell and you start hacking, right? That's option one. Option two is you go hunting around for a website that has an open LLM and you spend the requisite number of hours it takes to probe that LLM, look through that LLM's features, find out that what MCPs it's running and break into it and do something bad in using that one servers. Which do you think is more beneficial, profitable for you?
The LLM route, right? You didn't manipulate that? No?
Negative. No, because
Really?
you've only hacked one company. In the first model, you might have hacked
Yeah.
1,000, 10,000 companies. And better yet, I can run it tomorrow and I can run it the next day. And I can just keep running it by pressing one button and it'll just run all the time and just
It's a scalability
constantly
thing.
hack. Right, scale.
Yeah.
And so bad guys have a limited amount of time. They're not going to be spending time on one application at a time. Not now. I mean, we could push them into that. Yeah, I mean, if we solved the problem where that first thing didn't work, where they couldn't just arbitrarily run a scan across the internet and hack everything they felt like, then yeah, they might be forced to do the second thing. But right now, there's no financial upside. There's no upside in switching their techniques to something that takes a lot of time, a lot of expertise that they may or may not have, and it has no guarantee of success, and only hacks one company at a time. It just there's other ways. There is much better ways. So what you're really going to see is the only people who are actually going to get hacked by anything related to this are people who have a huge amount of humans already fucking with them. So like if you're Facebook, for instance, people are gonna mess with you constantly, right? Twitter, they're gonna constantly, right? Reddit, constantly, right? So if you are already a huge target and you live in the realm of companies that are going to be targeted, then yeah, you're going to get targeted by this other thing too, right? But if you're just a random company sitting on the internet with a random, Campbell soup or whatever, no one's spending all day breaking in Campbell soup's LLMs. I'm sorry, it's just not happening.
Interesting to get the take on that. It's a good point, I guess. It's
It's the difference
one
between what's probable and possible, right? Everyone's really focused on what's possible. And yeah, I know for a fact I can break into anything I feel like. I've already done that in my previous company. But that's not the problem. The problem is, okay, Robert, here's 50 grand or whatever. Like, what would you do with 50 grand? Well, I'm not going to spend all of my 50 grand in one spot. I'm going to try to diversify it as much as possible. And and scale my bad activities as much as I possibly can.
So is there a bit of a hype around it maybe at the moment? That's the whole
Oh,
AI
sure.
movement, yeah.
For sure. Yeah, 100%. I think mostly it comes from a enthusiasm. The enthusiasm is totally warranted. I mean, it's really very interesting technology in lots of ways and enables a lot of really interesting things. I think that there's new technologies to be made that are not quite possible yet, but within, 2 to 5 years, I totally could see them being possible that would potentially enable attackers to do interesting things. Right now, that is not feasible. Um, the cost is coming down significantly for very good LLMs where you can run them on your local desktop or run them in a cloud environment or whatever for very cheap, which will change things. So I think there's a lot of w wisdom around being concerned. It's just on the defensive side, if I'm going to look at it, I kind of have to treat it more like, well, imagine instead of having one sentient adversary, I now have 1,000. Okay, what does that really change about my environment? Well, they can probe a little deeper. They can probe a little wider, they can do more recon. You know what I mean? Like one of the things we found at White Hat was we had these little teams. It was called Hacker Combat, and it was like 5 people team or 7 people team or whatever. And what we found uh, pretty much every single time we ran it is the larger teams won. Just they won. They always won. It doesn't matter whether we'd have the foremost expert on whatever on one of the teams. They would never outperform the ones with bigger teams. So, yes, a large team of LLMs attacking you is much more dangerous than a single LLM attacking you. In the same way, a huge amount of hackers hacking you is way different than one hacker hacking you. Um, I don't think that that's so fundamentally different than, let's say, if you say something untoward online and a whole bunch of people start attacking you because of your ideas or philosophies or whatever. Like the same problem applies. You're gonna have a whole bunch of people trying to find anything they possibly can that's wrong to discredit you or do something bad or take you down or whatever. Um, I I think the real thing is that probable? Yes, it's possible. Is it probable? I don't think so. Not with the way things currently are. But even if they are probable down the road, I still wouldn't be worried so much about the LLM and MCP server or whatever. There's way more likely things that they're going to be going after that are low-hanging fruit and way more likely to get them what they're after than attacking the LLM. Now, one thing I will say about LLMs that people are not paying attention to is actually quite easy compared to everything else we've talked about is denial of service. And most people think denial of service means, excuse me, taking the site offline. What I mean by it is using billions and billions and billions and billions of tokens. And so suddenly your LLM that only cost you like 5 cents a day to run and isn't it cute and it's whatever, it's now cost you like $800,000 or whatever. And so if you don't have really tight cost constraints put in place around your LLM usage, you could actually end up in a situation where you have a huge bill. So I think that's quite likely as, for people who are, have spite against a company or something. But pretty much everything else is going to be someone who's extremely bored and already looking at it for another reason, in which case you just have a sentient adversary. You just have another smart person who dislikes you, and that's a hacker. That's what we call them.
This is fascinating. I think I could sort of ask you questions for hours on this. I won't because we're a little bit pressed for time and things, but this is awesome to get your take on this whole sort of space at the minute. And I guess flipping it away from sort of the AI-centric security piece, you mentioned earlier root evidence or evidence you bought out now. It's
Yeah.
not AI-centric, which is, is that allowed in today's day and age? Have you broken a law there? Like, what's the what's the play here?
Yeah. It is we certainly get the question every single time we talk about it. And it's not like there's zero AI ever in the company or something. Or it's not like we're allergic to the idea. It's just that it's not very performant. It's very expensive. It doesn't give uh perfect output every single time because it can hallucinate. Even if you do some clever tricks, and I have a lot of clever tricks on how to force it into JSON and make it perfect in other ways, it still won't be perfect because making decisions, and those decisions are stochastic, and there is a temperature associated with it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it really is just not a great tool for many tasks, but there are use cases for it. So like, for instance, let's say I want to do some sort of correlation between whether two or more things are the same company. Well, I'm not going to do that on every single company. That would be that's a combinatorially expensive problem that would you'd, that would be quadrillions of tokens to get that answer, right? For every website on the planet. I forget it. But what is possible is say, okay, here's all the kinds of metadata we have. Here's some examples of that metadata. What kind of correlations am I missing? Are there any other correlations I should turn into code? Which ones are, likely to end up giving me good data? Which ones aren't? How would you rank and rate them? How would you think about them? And then you take that data and a human reviews it and they go, you're right. This actually is a good correlation. I should probably turn this into code. And then it runs in code because you should not trust an LLM to do that work for you. Um, we might also use it for some development. I wouldn't exactly call it vibe coding, but just speeding up the development process, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But no, everything we do is all just a massive amount of very simple correlations and lookups. It's just that if you do that at internet scale, it turns out to be a huge problem, like a really, really huge problem. There's only a handful of companies on Earth who've solved it, like Google and Microsoft and those types of companies. Except for a lot of people like to try to compare us to them, like, well, are you going to build a data center? Ha ha ha, and all this stuff. It's like, well, the thing is, Google is kind of interesting because they have quote unquote all the world's information, but that's actually not true. They don't have any IP printers and firewalls. They don't have switches. They don't have SCADA systems. They don't have your test server, your QA server, your admin server. They don't have the bulk of the internet indexed. They have only the searchable indexed part of the internet indexed, which means it's got to be stuff that isn't behind any sort of firewall. It can't be on the dark net. It can't be hidden behind a password, and it has to be something that with a link to it somewhere. And that turns out to be a very small problem. It's actually not particularly difficult. We're talking a few petabytes of data. And so really what Google's major problem is indexing it and making sure they know what you're searching for semantically and what's a good query versus a bad query, et cetera, that kind of thing. What we're worried about is sort of the opposite. I want to find the stuff that no one knows about. I want to find the stuff that no one's ever heard of, no one's ever seen, has never been indexed by anybody. Maybe it's only been on the internet for a few minutes. I want to find that because what that it represents is a new attack surface. And that represents a potential way for a bad guy to get in, especially if there's a vulnerability on there, especially if that vulnerability is actually used by adversaries. So I need to get there as quickly as possible, ideally way before the adversary does, and giving the good guys time enough to get in front of that problem and turn off that service or, patch it or whatever they need to do to get rid of it. Um, so I have Google's problem of the searchable web, but I also have all of the other things that you could reach from the public internet. So it's a huge, huge problem, very complicated, very big architecture. But if you do it right, you can basically index all the companies on the planet, all the organizations, everybody who has um, kind of circles you can draw around their equipment. If that makes sense.
Yeah. And so how does it, with root evidence specifically then, how are you kind of like cutting out that, I guess, the noise aspect of vulnerability management?
Well, most people are focused on the 309,000 CVEs. How many of them do you think are actually used? I mean, if you were to guess, how many do you think actually get used in on any given year, let's say?
I don't know, 5%, something like that.
Not even close. Way less.
Wow.
The high number I've seen is 4,000. The number I think is probably closer to being true is sub 300.
Wow.
And if you look at like Mandy M-Trends report or similar like Verizon breach report, it's somewhere between 12 and 30, right? Of new CVEs that are used in any given year.
Wow.
That lead to loss, that lead to like an actual breach and a loss, right?
Out of how many? What was the initial number again? Sorry.
309,000.
Wow.
So we're multiple orders of magnitude less than what people are actually concerned with. Um, I'm not sure if I am in love with this term, but we need a word for like 1,000 years in the future. I look back in my bug tracking system and there's a vulnerability there that's never been used. Is that really a vulnerability? I mean, yes, it could be used, but literally no one ever has, and there's no indication anyone ever will. For lack of a better term, I've been calling it a null. It's like it's a vulnerability that will never ever be used. And if you look, let's assume Vulncheck is right, and they're the high watermark, and there are about 4,000 vulnerabilities approximately. So around approximately 1.1% of vulnerabilities have ever been used according to them, right? And I think they're very smart guys over there. I actually have a lot of respect for those guys. Patrick Garrity in particular, super smart guy. If he's right, that means that over 300,000 of the 309,000 vulnerabilities are these nulls that they've never been used. Uh, that means what are we doing as an industry? Why are we spending a, well over 98% of our time on things that have never been used? I just don't think we have right-sized the spend. I don't think we've over-engineered on things that just don't need the time and expertise on. We've wasted countless hours trying to fix things that are not issues. I was just talking to a PCERT team of a very large hardware manufacturer yesterday, and they're like, we spent like months, maybe even a year or more, trying to fix these like one deep architectural level flaws. He's like, Robert, do you think anyone's ever used that in a vulnerability? I'm like, I'll do one better. I know that they haven't. I've actually looked at the data. I know they haven't. And I gave him some other examples from his company of things that have also made the news that also were never used in any breach ever. And he's like, we've spent untold millions and millions and millions of dollars on this, and it's basically just a big
Wow.
publicity thing. Uh, and I feel really bad for him because it's like instead of just putting out there, yeah, there's this issue and we'll fix it in the next version. And sorry, this happens when you ship physical hardware around. We can't fix it once it's out, basically. You know what I mean? They're wasting just untold amount of time and energy and whatever, and they're just one company. Imagine once you scale that up to every enterprise, every small business that's being told like you're failing XYZ policy thing or whatever because you have this one minor issue that literally no attacker will ever find ever in the history of the planet.
Yeah.
Like this is a real problem. Our industry has optimized for the wrong thing. And we think that there's a whole new way of thinking about things that starts stemming from actual real data as opposed to people's feelings about high, medium, and low, or red, yellow, green, or A, B, C, D. These are all what I call stop line information security. They're all bounded. And how you know that it doesn't work is if I say you have a red and I have 10 yellows, how many yellows do I have to give you for that to equal one red?
Mm.
How would you do that math? Well, it turns out
Yes.
there's no math there to do. It's not math. And then when people try to turn it into math by changing it instead of A, B, C, D or something, they change it to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, which is super common. Or they'll do it from 0 to 1,000, which is, by the way, 1,001, which is a weird number, but whatever. Whenever they do that, you're thinking, okay, I can do math on it now because it's a number. Well, let's say it's from 1 to 10 or something, or 0 to 10, which is 11, by the way. But let's say you do it from 0 to 10. And you say 10 is the world-ending F. It's $1 billion loss if this thing happens. Well, okay, cool. Well, I will just fix 10 ones because 10 ones, if you add them all together, that's a 10.
Mm.
And you just told me that that's the math because I get to do math on that. It turns out that that's not math either. Just because you put a number on it doesn't mean you get to do math on it. You're just we're trying to codify people's emotions about vulnerabilities as opposed to actually really what the adversaries are doing. Because one thing that everyone seems to forget is we actually have an adversary. The
Mm.
adversary is sentient. They actually do have feelings about things, and we actually are dealing in a real business environment with actual monetary loss, not fake monetary loss, not like, oh, bad thing happened, we got compromised. No, actual losses happen, and that's measurable stuff that we can go and add together and turn into a measurement of the bad thing happens, X loss occurs. How often does that occur? Well, in your industry with these vulnerabilities, it happens this often, right? You start adding that together, and that's what your expected value of loss is. That is the amount. People think of security as a cost center, but that is actually the amount of risk that you can retire and the amount of value you can retain as a company. Otherwise, you have unrealized loss. You're going to lose this eventually, statistically, if it's a vulnerability that's being used. If it's not, that's a different story. But if it's a vulnerability that's being used, you can say, like, I go to my CFO and I'm like, hey, can I have $50,000? I want to retire $9.4 million worth of risk. And they can say, well, let me see your math. Because now you're talking math. And math is a conversation that CFOs, the real risk officers of the company, totally understand and speak fluently. What security people are doing now is like, I want $50,000 to fix three cross-site scriptings, two cross-site request forgeries, a SQL injection, and I want to change my grade from a B plus to a A minus or something. It's like, what are you talking about? Like, none of that has any bearing on the rest of the business. We don't understand what you mean. You talk to sales, they talk, how much money they're making. You talk to marketing, how much revenue do they put in the pipeline? You talk to sales, they're like, we want a B plus. It's like, why
Yeah.
are we so behind? And it all stems from these sets of issues.
I see. I got you. So I guess it's a way of cleaning out what actually matters and making it translatable to the wider business and so on and so forth. Which, yeah, like we have those conversations very, very regularly, and often from a recruitment standpoint, it's James, we need someone who's able to do the technical stuff, but also translate that back to the business is such an increasing skill set in the last, yeah, well, 6, 7, 8 years. That's been so prevalent with the type of roles
Hmm.
we got coming through.
Totally.
And Robert, we've touched on a lot here, so thank you for diving into these areas. But I guess just to close out, what are you looking forward to next 12 months or so?
Um, I look forward to a renaissance when people start looking at the same evidence that we're looking at. Right now, I just can't give it to everybody. The real reason I can't give it to anyone, I mean, we're under some contracts, but the real reason they wouldn't understand what they're looking at. I think we need to do a better job of framing up the conversation first so that they're ready to consume this information when we finally do make it available to them. Because when it's available, like people still believe CVSS scores mean things. They still truly believe there's a reason you would ever fix a medium and a high versus a low. They actually truly believe that that is a real thing, and there and there's tons of data I have to prove that that's not actually true. Or like prediction models and how they work, and it's like, well, yeah, you have to predict. Like, let's say M-Trends is right. There's 12 vulnerabilities that have been used in 2024, new vulnerabilities. That means you're something like 0.00003% chance that you're going to get this exactly right. And the more vulnerabilities I add, it actually makes it worse because you have to predict both, not just one vulnerability, right? You have to predict all the vulnerabilities that are going to get used. So it actually multiplies out and gets worse. The prediction models have to be so perfect, and it turns out they never can be the way they're architected. It's going to be really hard to explain to people what we know, and they're not going to take it on faith. They're going to want to see the data. They're going to want to see what we're seeing, and so I'm looking forward to when everyone's kind of up to speed, and now we're all as an industry kind of talking and looking at the same thing at the same time, because I think it'll professionalize our industry in a way that we've just honestly never gotten around to.
Love that. A little bit mysterious. Leave something to come back for.
Yeah, yeah, sounds good. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Robert, thank you so much for your time again. I really appreciate it. We'll chuck a few
Thanks for
links
having me
below
on,
to
James.
everything, and let's speak again
Appreciate
soon.
it. All right, thank you.